Hey everybody, Eric here from TOURNA-MIX, the ultimate mix competition website. Hope you're doing good. If you like mix contests, check us out. We've got a link in the description below. We host 2 contests every single month. It's a lot of fun. We also give away free multi-tracks just for subscribing. So again, check the link below. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe. So we're looking at Kush Blyss today, which is a mastering style plugin that Kush released a year or two ago. It's a really, really nice sounding plugin, and it can actually be used for a lot more than just mastering or just mix bus duties. It is marketed as kind of a bus, processor, but I can tell you that it sounds great on vocals, great on acoustic guitar, really kind of just great on everything. Now, rather than doing a full plugin review where I explain how every single knob in this thing works, I'd rather actually just show you how I use this plugin in the context of an actual mix, because the truth is it's such a simple plugin to use that, 5 minutes spent with the manual and you'll be up and running in no time. But in case you've never seen this before, real quick, we have saturation in the middle, followed by a 4-band EQ. You can see the 4 big knobs here at the top. Different frequency points can be selected. The bands can be turned on and off, and we even have high pass and low pass filters here, right, as an option. Okay, so an EQ section, and then finally a very, very simple compressor section, threshold, makeup gain, on and off, and 2 options for timing. So we have like either fast attack, fast release, or slow attack, slow release. So that's Kush Blyss in a nutshell. Okay, saturation, followed by EQ, followed by compression. So it's like, a channel strip, which is why it's kind of marketed as a mastering plugin. But again, you can use this for like a ton of stuff. All right, so that's my quick and dirty lowdown of how it works. Let's actually hear it in action, which I think is far more beneficial. So let's check out this mix. This is L'Artama by Cesar Habianu, who is a TOURNA-MIX member. Really, really great pop song. Great production. It's going to be actually released in September. My mix is not the official mix. This is just my little offering, okay? The official mix was done by Cesar, and he did a great job. So without further ado, let's check out this mix. I'll just play up until the end of the first chorus. Here we go.
Pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un pic. Dar timpul e un joc cu care inima trișează atunci când sufletul o cere și doar zâmbetul îți visează. Da, eu am crezut în tine, eu am crezut în noi. Mi-ai spus că ți-a ajuns, că nu mai vrei iar înapoi. Dar lacrimile șterse pe obrazul fiind de catifea mi-au ars și ultima speranță. Iartă-mă, îmi cere mai mult decât un ultim sărut amar. Iartă-mă că mă caut pe mine uitat pe fundul unui pahar. Uită-mă, rotila din sânge mi-arde amintirea ta. Lasă-mă, mirosit de putere, nu mai sunt omul tău de show, doar un eco.
Gotta like that. Really, really slick pop song. Cesar Habianu, folks. Amazing job. Let's take a look at the processing. All right, so if we start with the drums, this is like the raw drums with literally 0 processing. I've even turned off all my mix bus processing other than just the final limiter. So here's the raw drums. All right, so they sound great. I actually couldn't really think of anything that needed to be done to them on a track level other than some basic clipping and limiting. So you can see here, like I have a few clippers and limiters turned on. This is like on my drum bus, doing like just a dB of clipping here and there. I've got some clippers on my snare and kick. I've got a few limiters running, but really I didn't do anything to the drums. Okay, I added a little bit of reverb to a couple of tracks, but here's like the mixed drums now, if you will. They sound identical. Okay. Now, part of the reason why I didn't do a lot of drum processing was I didn't think they needed it, but also I got a lot of mileage out of my mix bus chain. So if I turn on all my mix bus stuff here, we'll come back to that in a minute, but here's like the drums now. You can hear there's a lot more crisp kind of life to them. If I turn all this stuff off, right? Okay, so basically all my drum mixing was kind of done on Mixbus. And again, we will check those plugins out in a minute. Let me just turn those all back on. So kind of right out of the gates, things were sounding pretty good. Again, here's the drums. Probably the only real EQ that I did. This is the kick. I added a little bit of subs to the kick and a little bit of mid-range. But that is it. The drums shipped really, really, sounding great right out of the gates. Let me bring in the bass. We're in the chorus right now, by the way. Okay, so here's the bass. And it was one of these sounds that was kind of already good to go, so I really didn't do much to it. I did sidechain it to the kick a little bit here. So if we watch this, we've got this typical kind of, as the kick hits, the bass is ducking a little bit. You can see here that, Pro Q3 has that handy little feature where it shows you kind of where the frequencies are clashing. Okay, so I've high passed at about 50 hertz, and then I've got this little dynamic cut here that ducks the bass down. All right, and then I'm just limiting the bass and adding a little bit of compression with AR1. I love this compressor from Kush. So gentle peak limiting, and the compression, you can see, I mean, like this bass sound was already compressed, obviously. Like there's not a lot of dynamics here. So this was, maybe not even 100% necessary to compress it, but I did it. I thought it worked. So here's the drums and bass again. All right, so I think those are playing pretty well together. Let's bring in some instruments. So the main kind of instrument or theme of the song was this acoustic guitar. So let me just bypass all my processing here. So here's the raw acoustic that we were provided with. It's nicely recorded. Okay, that's like the signature hook of the song, and with all the processing, it sounds like this. All right, so let me walk you through this. It's really, really simple. Again, these tracks didn't need much work. Other than the vocals, which kind of always need a bit of mixing, the actual band was in great shape. So I used 3 plugins on the acoustic guitar. This last one is just a gain plugin. I just raised it 2 dB. So I won't show the gain plugin, but here are the 3 processors. So I did a little bit of gentle peak limiting to begin with. You can see that the acoustic had kind of a spiky nature about it. So I just lopped off the top peaks a little bit. So you can watch L1 working here. It's just catching the odd peak. Very, very gentle. Okay, hardly working at all. All right, and then I have Blyss set up here. Let me just turn off Omega A here, actually. So here's Blyss. Let me turn Blyss off. And back on. You can hear a really nice, smooth kind of sheen come in here. All right, so I'm using the high-pass filter here. Oops, I have it turned off. Let me turn it back on. At 50 hertz, all right? I'm also cutting some 120. Cutting a little bit of 800 and then adding a little bit of sheen on the top end. These are only quarter dB increments. So a little boost at 8K and a little boost at 3K. And then to my ear, this acoustic guitar already sounded compressed. It kind of had a little bit of that sucking and pumping vibe already. So I didn't want to compress it too much. Really, really subtle 1 dB of compression on the slow setting here. That's the slow attack, slow release. Let's check this out again. I didn't use any saturation because I didn't feel it needed it. I eventually did add some saturation with Omega A though. So here's off again. Just a bit dark. And then finally Omega A for some extra brightness. Really like Omega A on acoustic guitar. That's off. And on. All right, so that was the processing, and you can hear some pretty big reverbs there. I've got 2 reverbs set up here. One is a plate and one is kind of like a long haul. Okay, maybe I'll show those effects a little later, but that was the general idea with this acoustic guitar. And it was like the signature hook. So if I turn on all the instruments here, if I mute all of my processing and reverbs, kind of sounds a bit lifeless. Feels better to me. All right, so that was Blyss on acoustic guitar. Really, really smooth sounding plugin. I just love it. Let's take a look at a few other things here. Now, similar to the drums, like all of the other instruments other than the acoustic, they kind of shipped to us ready to go. They were just a lot of little cool synth parts, that really didn't require any processing to my ear. I mean, like if I solo up these kind of things, like this stuff here, they're just already kind of perfect. Okay, so, you know, I added like a few high pass filters to them and a few limiters. I like limiting little parts like this because you can't hear the limiter working, but it just makes sure that they're kind of tucked in nice, and it's going to help your crest factor and just help the density of your mix. So I added some limiters to some of them, like this main guy here, this main guitar part rather here at the end. I added a little high pass filter. But again, these tones were chosen so well that there really just wasn't much to do. Let's get over to the vocals because that's where I used Blyss a lot, and that was admittedly the hardest part of the mix in general. So let's have a listen to this final vocal here in the verse. This is mixed.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timpul e un joc cu care
Okay. Now here's dry without the effects.
are inima trișează atunci când
Here's
sufletul
without
o
any
cere și
processing.
doar zâmbetul îți visează, da. Eu am crezut în tine, eu am crezut în noi. Mi-ai spus că ți-a ajuns, că nu mai vrei iar înapoi, dar lacrimile ce te...
So quite a transformation there, as is often the case with vocals. So let me just run you through the chain. This last plugin is just gain again, so I'm not going to show that, but let's take a look at everything else. All right, so what we have here is some gentle peak limiting, kind of similar to how I showed in the acoustic guitar. I'm just catching the odd peak with this thing into Blyss. Then we've got some sibilance control here with this guy from Waves, and then some AR1 for some compression, and finally some hammer EQ. All right, so let me build that back up for you. The peak limiting is extremely subtle. Let me just turn off all these guys here.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic
Right, just
la tot
kissing
ce a
it.
fost atunci când...
Maybe doing 3 dB at the most on certain peaks. Okay, so that was just to kind of level out the signal before I hit Blyss. You can see it's a little spiky at times, although to be honest, I don't always do this kind of thing. You don't need to limit your vocals first. It's just something I sometimes do. Now let's get to Blyss, which I think was one of the more powerful processors here. All right, so let me maybe just turn the effects off for now. And here's Blyss turned off.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă
It's a great
ridic
recording.
la tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timpul e un joc cu care inima...
That just kind of gives it that pop sheen here. So you can see we've got some 5K pushed up, almost 2 dB at 5K. We've got another dB at 8K, so that's giving a little more bite in the mid-range and sort of high end. And then a little cut at 400, just to get rid of some mud, and a little cut at 120. And then I'm also using the high pass. I mean, the highest option here is 50 hertz. So maybe normally I would have high passed a little higher and then not done this move, but I kind of used these two together to get the tone I wanted. You can see I've got the drive pushed up quite a bit here. It's 3/4 of the way around, and then just a bit of compression.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un
You
pic.
can see the intensity here of the drive is up pretty high.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost
Off
atunci
again.
când timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timpul e un joc cu care inima trișează atunci când...
I love how transparent this plugin is, even with some fairly big EQ. Not huge, but almost 2 dB at 5K is fairly aggressive. And it still sounds super, super smooth. Okay, then a little bit of sibilance, nothing too exciting there. I'll bring in AR1 again here for some additional compression.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost atunci
And
când
finally,
timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timp...
I decided that the vocal wasn't quite forward enough, so I brought in some 1.2K with hammer. So let me turn hammer off.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timpul
Kind of has that effect of bringing the vocal forward. Now, I find listening to this stuff in solo is so hard to judge anything, and it's also hard to judge without effects. Let me bring in the effects, bring the vocal back into context, and let me turn off my two kind of EQs, so the hammer and the Blyss. Listen to the difference.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timpul e un joc cu care inima trișează atunci când sufletul o cere și doar zâmbetul îți visează, da. Eu am crezut în tine, eu am crezut în noi. Mi-ai spus că ți-a ajuns, că nu mai vrei iar înapoi, dar lacrimile șterse pe obrazul fiind de catifa.
Just really brings it to life and allows it to stay on top of the mix. And it was the same basic idea in the chorus. You can see the chain is very, very similar here. It looks like the only real difference is, I'm not even sure. Oh yeah, I've got an extra gain plugin in the chain somewhere there. But here's the final mixed chorus vocals.
Iartă-mă și nu-mi cere mai mult decât un...
Okay, and again, if I turn Blyss off and turn off hammer, which were our two main tone shapers,
Iartă-mă și nu-mi cere mai mult decât un ultim să...
you can just hear it's super, super muddy. Let me turn those back on. And again, the processing was very similar.
Iartă-mă și nu-mi cere mai mult decât un ultim sărut amar.
Yeah, it was actually basically identical. I probably just copied over those settings from the verse and played with them just a little bit maybe. But essentially just, yeah, using Blyss and hammer to really shape that tone in context. Here we go.
Iartă-mă și nu-mi cere mai mult decât un ultim sărut amar.
Just gives it that kind of sheen. Now that was without all the background vocals. So if I turn them all back on, here we go.
Iartă-mă și nu-mi cere mai mult decât un ultim sărut amar. Iartă-mă că mă caut pe mine uitat pe fundul unui pahar. Uită-mă, rotila din sânge-mi arde ea.
Just like that, we have what sounds, at least to me, like a pretty good sounding, sheeny pop vocal, right? That sits on top. It's not harsh, I don't think. It's got a bit of that grit mixed in with Blyss here. You can hear a little bit of that saturation. Although the actual recorded vocal had a little bit of a kind of a saturation. It was a U87 that was used, and yeah, it has that kind of sound. I think it was a vintage. I can't remember, but anyway, there we go. That's my processing for that vocal. And then all of the background vocals, which were, significantly easier to mix than the lead, is often the case. Let me just solo over this guy here. Let's go like this. These were handled very, very easily with Blyss. I did my typical limiting here. Because it's a pop song, I like to limit vocals more than if it was folk or indie. So I've got a limiter going here, and then we've got Blyss and some sibilants.
Iartă-mă, iartă-mă.
Didn't have to do too much to this one. You can see here, I've got my high pass filter. I've got the cut at 120. This is, again, was probably copied over, but if I turn it off, it's just a little darker.
Iartă-mă,
Just hear a little bit of that boominess down low.
iartă-mă.
That cleans it up nicely. So yeah, that was the processing there. I added a bit of reverb as well. And I might as well talk about the effects now just for 2 seconds. I had 3 effects running on the vocals. So we've got some delay, some micro shift, and some Valhalla room. And this is kind of like this is like a 4.5 second chamber reverb that I decided was kind of cool for this particular song. So if we come back to that verse vocal.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic la tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit.
So I added this big stereo delay, which I do a lot.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic.
So this is a tape delay, right, with an 8th note left, quarter note right, gives it that kind of bounce around effect. It's not a ping pong, but it has that same kind of vibe. Rolling off the high end here. This is the EQ. If I'd left that over here, a little bright. Okay, and that was the delay. And then the reverb was probably the biggest one here. If I turn that on, right, that's that kind of sound.
Ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timpul e un joc cu care inima.
And I don't use close to 5-second reverbs too often, but in this song I thought it was cool. And then finally I just added some micro shift for a little bit of that kind of pop, pop chorus sound.
Nu pot să te împac, nu știu să mă ridic.
This kind of never gets old in pop.
That
kind of sound. And it's amazing, effects have such an important role in pop. Without them, it just sounds kind of weird. Actually, it doesn't sound weird at all. It just has a totally different sound. I actually kind of like the dry sound too. That could have worked.
La tot ce a fost atunci când timpul s-a oprit un pic, dar timpul e un joc cu care inima.
I definitely prefer it with the ambience. So that was the effects that I used on pretty much all the vocals. There wasn't anything else to show there. But then as I showed at the start, of the tutorial, my mix bus chain is actually, there's a lot going on here, okay? So Blyss was up first, and I actually didn't use the saturation too much because I'd added quite a bit to the vocals already. So I experimented with pushing this up higher, but there's such a thing as having too much of a good thing. And this saturation is really, really nice. But if you use it too often, it can pile up and just start to sound a bit messy. So I kept it pretty simple. Other than that, I added a little bit of mix bus compression, all right, and a little bit of high end here at 28K. That's almost above what we can hear, but it adds a certain sheen, and a little bit of subs here, right down at 40 hertz. So I didn't actually do too much with Blyss this time around, but we will have a quick listen to this here. So if we check the chorus here, let's just start with it on and I'll do a little toggle.
Iartă-mă și nu cere mai mult decât un ultim sărut amar. Iartă-mă că mă caut pe mine uitat pe fundul unui pahar. Uită-mă, rotila din sânge-mi arde amintirea ta. Lasă-mă, mirosi de putere.
You know, it's subtle, but it really does just make the mix come alive a little bit. It's not like a massive change, but I really miss it without the Blyss on. Now, I don't remember if I mentioned this earlier in the video, but Blyss is a little bit sensitive to gain staging and sort of what the incoming signal is. So as you can see here, I've got a gain plugin before Blyss, okay, minus 8 dB, and another one after Blyss, bringing it back up to where it was. And what this does is it ensures that our signal isn't sort of bouncing up too close to the top. If I turn these two off, okay, watch the incoming signal here with the green indicator. And so this is what they kind of warn against in the manual. Now, I actually don't hear any distortion or anything like that. So like, it's probably not a big deal, but I like to, especially on mix bus where everything is funneling through it, I like to pay attention to the gain staging. And now you can see a healthier incoming level that only sort of just barely bumps up against the 0 mark. All right, so that was Blyss on Mixbus. I could have probably pushed it a lot further, but it was one of those things where I added it early in the mix and got it to a certain point, and then as the mix progressed, I wanted more brightness, more low end, stuff like that, and so I just started bringing in other plugins. All right, now I brought in the VSM4 from Vertigo Sound to kind of clip the sound a bit and try to hammer down my peaks, and just to add a bit more brightness. Cere mai mult decât un ultim sărut amar. Iartă-mă că mă caut pe mine uitat pe fundul unui pahar. Uită-mă. So you can hear it's not a big change, and you know, often that you don't need a big change on Mixbus. You're just looking to kind of improve something in whatever way works. And in this case here, I liked it better on than off. And again, it kind of hammered down some peaks for me and allowed me to get a louder master down the road. All right, so there was that. Then I brought in Mag for some low end and high end. Now again, I could have gone back to Blyss and just pushed up more lows and highs. But you know, when you're working or mixing, like you get to a point where you're like, oh, I hear something. And, you know, at this point, it already added I'd already added the Vertigo, right? So to go back before the Vertigo and add more high end with Blyss, it's not the same as bringing more high end after, right? So often it's helpful just to open a new plugin. So you can see a big boost at 10K and a lot of subs. Yeah, so that was a pretty big one. It's interesting how the mix stays very much the same all through the mid-range, but then the lows and high-end perks up. And what it does to my ear is it deboxes the mix. Without it on, the mix just has more of that kind of, I don't know, I hear like 700 to 2K area that sounds a bit boxy, but because we're boosting on either end of that kind of, it deboxes and just makes it sound more pop. So that was the Mag. Then I added a bit more compression here because I was pretty gentle with Blyss the first time around. Okay, so just adding a couple more dB of compression. And then I brought in two of my favorite EQs from Kush, which is Clariphonic and Hammer. These guys also kind of just added more and more sheen to the sound. I also cut a bit of 400 with Hammer here, but essentially I'm pushing up 2K, 15K, and then also some Clariphonic. Let me toggle those on and off. So just chipping away at the block here. I like using multiple EQs on Mixbus for some reason, rather than trying to load it all into one. Like, you know, you can see with the Mag here, I had already a lot of high end. And I found that continuing with that and pushing it up didn't really work, but for some reason bringing in other EQs did. So that's what I did there. And then into the mastering kind of side of things here, you can see I did a little bit of mastering style EQ. Nothing too exciting here, just a little bit more subs down at 40 hertz. Little, like these are very small cuts, okay? That's like, under a dB. And then a little bump here at 2K. So, I won't toggle that on and off, but I did bring that in. Then I clipped the whole thing just to try to get a little more loudness out of the master, about 1.5 dB of clipping, okay, with K-Clip. And then this is a new tool that I just snagged recently. This is the SPL Vitalizer. I'm really enjoying it. This is, again, just to add more subs and more high end. Also a little bit of widening. This is very, very subtle, but I did widen out the mix a little bit. And then everybody knows this guy. I used the Oxford inflator just for a little bit of extra loudness. And then finally, some limiting. I can't even remember how hard I pushed this. Yeah, not hard at all. And my master in the chorus was at about -8 LUFS, that's about as loud as I like to go. So you can see like a lot of mix bus stuff happening. If I turn off everything that's in EQ, okay, I'll leave on the saturation here. I'll leave on the vertigo saturator. But if I turn off the mag and the 2 Kush EQs and this SPL thing and even my mastering EQ, let's hear it now. It's the exact same, mix, but it just has so much of a different tonality, and it's a lot smoother that way, but it's a lot less exciting, and it just sort of sounds boxy and muddy. So there you go, heavy mix bus processing. I do this a lot with arrangements that are really good, where you don't have to work the individual tracks to death. And, in a lot of pop songs, the tracks themselves are already like these perfect samples and, VSTs and one-shots and all this stuff that you don't really have to dig in with EQ too much. So I personally like to load up on mix bus in this kind of situation. So that was my full mix. I'm not going to show all of these background vocal groups. They were all done exactly the same way. And ultimately it was a pretty hands-off mix until it came to the mix bus, and then I just added a ton of stuff. So why don't we leave it there for today? I want to give a huge shout out to Cesar Habianu for providing us with this awesome pop song to mix, and I really want to thank Kush Audio for sponsoring us with Blyss this month. I think it's a fantastic plugin. I used it mostly in this mix on vocals. Mostly because a lot of these other tracks just didn't need any work. I was actually sort of hoping I could dig in more with it. But it was a fantastic processor on vocals, great on mix bus. It's definitely something that can fit into almost any mixer's tool belt. And so thank you to Kush. And if you're watching this before July 24th, there's still time to join our mix contest this month. Again, follow the link in the description below, and we'll see you over at TOURNA-MIX. Thanks a lot for watching. Take care.